Hi, I'm Femi Okay.
And I'm Malika Bilal, and you're in the stream live on Al Jazeera and YouTube.
Today in Nicaragua, anti-government demonstrations have turned into the country's deadliest protests since the 1980s.
We'll look at the continued violence and ask whether human rights are being protected.
In the 2 months since many Nicaraguans began calling for President Daniel Ortega to step down, parts of the country have descended into heavy violence, while peace talks have yielded little progress for an end to the crisis. Protests began in April in response to a proposed overhaul of the country's pension system. Grievances quickly turned to Ortega himself as the people accused him of running a corrupt government.
Some anti-government protesters armed with their own homemade weapons have clashed with police and pro-Ortega paramilitary groups. More than 200 people have been killed since April. And despite the government's pledge to stop the violence, human rights groups say protesters continue to be killed, detained, or even disappeared.
So to help us understand the situation in Nicaragua, joining us on the set, we have Latin America correspondent Manuel Rapallo. He was covering the crisis in Nicaragua last week for Al Jazeera. In Managua, Camilo de Castro, he is a human rights activist and a journalist. In Esteli, Nicaragua, Stephen Sefton, he's a writer for Tortilla con Sal, that's a news site that identifies with the Sandinista National Liberation Front. And we also have Juan Sebastian Chamorro. He's a leader of the main civic alliance looking to negotiate peace with the government. We also invited members of the Nicaraguan government to share their perspectives, but they have not responded to us. But gentlemen, it's good to have you here. Stephen, this idea of trying to get a government response, or trying to get an idea of how the government is dealing with this crisis, how would you sum it up from your perspective?
Well, right from the start, on April 21st, about 3 days after the protests, which were perfectly legitimate for the first 24 hours, and they were peaceful, as was correctly reported in the mainstream media. But after that, they were taken over by extremely violent right-wing activists who were very well armed and very well prepared. But despite the violence of those first 3 days, President Daniel Ortega on April the 21st called for a national dialogue, which was accepted by the right-wing business sector that was also involved in protests. And then the following day, Sunday, April 22nd, President Ortega requested the Catholic Church hierarchy to mediate the dialogue. So right from the start, the dialogue has been committed to peace. And from April 23rd, they instructed the police not to use live rounds and to keep a very low profile. So I think from my point of view, the role of the government has been, from the start, to try and negotiate a peaceful solution to the crisis. And unfortunately, my feeling is that the opposition have been resolutely opposed to taking an honest part in the dialogue.
Let me share this with you. This is online from a nun who's also a journalist, and she summarizes, I'm using the translation here from Twitter, a summary of the current situation in Nicaragua. Although from June the 21st to today, there are already more dead, injured, imprisoned and disappeared, 212 killed, 1,337 wounded, 507 plus in prison. So many issues here, Juan Sebastian. Stephen says that the government is trying to negotiate in good faith, but how do you describe this list? And it's not even the latest list of what's been happening to some of the protesters in Nicaragua today.
Well, first of all, I would like to denounce the brutality of the Ortega dictatorship, brutality that I have seen with my own eyes. This violence and brutality against innocent civilians is the reason why the popular uprising is not going to stop. And this is not popular. This is a popular uprising, not an uprising from any political movement or anything like that. And I want to emphasize one thing: the killing, the extrajudiciary killing, started on April 19th. It is not true that that killings occur later. The extrajudiciary killings started the very first day of the revolt, of the protest. Right now, as we speak, there has been 285 people dead. This has been denounced by human rights organizations. One of them is precisely the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, which says that there has brought responsibility of the state of Nicaragua, to who have violated fundamental rights, including life, personal integrity, health, freedom, assembly, expression, and access to justice. This is the most important and relevant human rights commission by the Organization of American States, and have issued a very strong report blaming the state of Nicaragua as responsible for all these killings. So in addition to that, Amnesty International issued a report that says in the title here, "Shoot to Kill," showing ample evidence of the extrajudiciary killings committed by the Nicaraguan police force and thugs that's been armed also by the government. There is ample evidence of all these human rights violations. So in other words, we are at this moment living under an extraordinary circumstances of a humanitarian crisis.
And Juan Sebastian, I want to follow up on those extraordinary circumstances, the list really that you detailed, with a couple of experiences from our community about what they are seeing. This is one person on Twitter who says, "We still don't know how many are detained or just missing, or if they're still alive. The numbers grow every day. We have 212 plus dead, including little kids. And just this weekend, they shot a 15-month-old in the head. That was a sniper, and it was caught on camera." Now, we got a video comment from someone who mentions that same incident and how it struck her. This is Denai. She's a journalist in Managua, and this is what she told the stream.
One of the cases that affected me the most was the case of a 15-month-old kid who died by a bullet wound in his head. He was walking with his parents on the streets when they apparently were attacked by paramilitaries or police, and the baby died. I think every Nicaraguan wants to see justice, not only for this death, but for the more than 200 deaths that have occurred in these 2 months.
So Manny, the incident that she mentions, I pulled up on my screen here, this is from Al Jazeera, Nicaragua unrest, baby among 5 killed in fresh protests. That's from June 24th. It doesn't seem to gel with what we heard earlier from Stephen, who mentioned that the police were told to keep a low profile. I know that you just returned from Nicaragua, but can you make sense of those two things for us?
Sure. So I made 2 trips within the last couple of months to Nicaragua. One to visiting Masaya, where it's a lot of the most brutal fighting has been concentrated between anti-government demonstrators and the government, and also most of my time spent in Managua. The incident that we're learning about right now is not that different than another one that we heard about a week and a half ago, where a house with a family of 6 was set on fire and 2 children of the age of 2 were killed inside that house. The government has repeatedly denied any responsibility in both that incident as well as in the ongoing conflict, saying that they're not using live rounds, that they're not participating in these claims of human rights abuse. But the evidence compiled by human rights observers, both from Amnesty International, from the Inter-American Human Rights Commission, which prepared a preliminary report to the Organization of American States just last weekend, all point to something completely different, which is an ongoing systematic repression against peaceful demonstrators in Nicaragua. And one of the conditions set by the Catholic Church is very influential in Nicaragua. They've been hosting this ongoing national dialogue that, for better or for worse, is the only thing that's truly mediating this conflict. The main condition of the Catholic Church for this dialogue to continue has been for the government of President Ortega to stop the heavy-handed, to use a light term, approach to anti-government demonstrators, something that the government has failed to do, which is why we've seen a continuation of the violence, which is why we see very little progress being made in way of these peace talks.
Stephen, when Juan Sebastian was showing the shoot to kill poster, you said something and I didn't quite hear what it was. Can you repeat it? What did you want to say?
Yeah, and what I want to say is that it's true that there are plenty of human rights organizations making these denunciations, but none of those cases have been investigated. And the Inter-American Commission for Human Rights made their report based on information that they just accepted at face value from human rights organizations in Nicaragua that have a long track record over a couple of decades of being vicious anti-government opponents. And a lot of those cases are, as your reporter pointed out, Manny pointed out, disputed by the government. Now, something Manny said that was very interesting was he talked about peaceful protesters. Now, I have a question for Manny. Manny, could you please explain how it is that as a result of peaceful protests, 10 police officers have been killed and over 200 have been injured? Don't you think that's a little strange as a result of...
I'll gladly answer that question. I'm not saying that there are not elements of criminal organizations that have infiltrated the peaceful protests, but overwhelmingly, from my experience, from my observation, the people that are on the ground there are armed with slingshots, are armed with rocks, and they are, if you want to say that rocks are weapons, sure, they are armed. And they're armed with homemade mortars, which may be a less than lethal weapon. I think that at the very best, they are fireworks launchers. And these people are up against automatic weapons, live rounds, and snipers. On Mother's Day, on May 30th, we were on the ground during one of the largest demonstrations that Nicaragua had seen up until that point. 500,000 people marching on the streets of Managua. At the very end of that march, I actually don't remember how many were killed. Somewhere around a dozen people were killed when snipers opened fire on a crowd of civilians.
I want to point to the initial comment by Stephen regarding the nature of the protest to talk about the origin of all this. It is regretful that the Nicaraguan government for years has labeled everybody who disagrees with them as extreme right-wing, as part of an extreme right-wing conspiracy. If you go out on the streets to talk to people and see who's out there on the barricades, in the universities, who is protesting, we're talking about people who are workers, who are students, who are people generally concerned about what is happening in the country. And this has been part of a pattern over the years that this government has been in power, disqualifying people who have a different opinion. And this is what has led to the situation, because there's been a breakdown in the institutional framework that allows people to actually voice their opinion in a peaceful, voice their opinion and be heard. And so what you have is a protest over a very legitimate issue, which was the Social Security, which could have gone on and ended without a problem, but it didn't happen because the students who were on the street were immediately attacked. And people reacted to that. And they reacted to that because this has been going on for many, many years. And now it's escalated to the point where they have these, hooded thugs on the street, followed by the police, going around killing people. And this has been widely documented. This is probably the most well-documented rebellion in the history of Central America, because everybody has cell phones. Everybody has cell phones. Everybody has cell phones. Everybody has, and is taking pictures.
On the night of April the 20th,
so
a gang of between 500 and 600 people attacked the municipal office here in Esteli. They attacked it with Molotov cocktails, with firearms, and it's completely untrue.
Even those people are government followers. It has been widely proven already that those people who attacked that place, including, if you talk to the families of people who were killed during that, who have been killed in Esteli, I think you should go talk to the families of the people who have been killed.
I knew one of the students that was killed, and that individual, Orlando, who's a great guy, unfortunately was duped into taking part into that demonstration, which involved the participation of between 200 and 300 people from outside Managua, who had nothing to do with Esteli. And this group of between 500 and 600 people, I was here. And they attacked the alcalde and tried to burn it down.
You think people are risking their lives because they're being duped? People are risking their lives because they believe in liberty, because people are tired of the government running over their rights and not listening to their...
And Camilo, I hear you there. Camilo, I hear what you're saying about people being tired of their rights being really trampled upon. I want to bring up A perspective that we don't see a whole lot of online, I'll admit. It was very difficult to find people who are pro-Ortega at this point, at least on Twitter during our outreach. But we got this question from someone on Twitter saying, could Ortega be there all these years without people's support? So we did find one woman. Her name is Regina Sandoval, and she since deleted her Twitter account after speaking with us on this. She says, I'm a native of Nicaragua and have been visiting my country for the past 15 years. And in the last 10 years, I've only seen positive improvements, of course, with much more to accomplish. However, I've never seen repression of any kind. The economy was booming and tourists were flooding Nicaragua. Of course, she is now an expat. But Juan Sebastian, I'm wondering about the support for Ortega. What is left of it? What are the polls saying? What are you hearing from people?
Well, first of all, it is true that certain economic sectors, like in the tweet that they mentioned, were doing extremely well. However, because of this crisis, the tourist industry is simply gone. 1 million people came last year to Nicaragua to visit, and because of this repression by the government, by the police, are bringing the country to a halt. And I want to mention something that is very important. When Amnesty International was in the country and saw in live how snipers were shooting at the demonstrations on Mother's Day. This is not something that I report that was written from outside. The people from Amnesty International actually saw the repression. So you know, it's and I think the explanation of all this popular revolt across all sectors of the society. You have to understand that all sectors of society has been protesting for different reasons: the environment, the violations of human rights, the violations of the right to protest, to assemble. This has been a very repressive government that tried to put a situation that didn't exist in reality.
Let me just play this to you. Stephen, I hear you. I just want to move things on just a little bit. I hear you want to come back, and we will come back to you. Manny, you did a whole series of reports. You just got back from Nicaragua. One of your reports was about families calling for the release of detainees. I want to be very frank here about what you saw and what you reported on. I'm going to play this a little bit of this story here, one of the stories that you did for Al Jazeera. Sure. Have a listen.
These desperate mothers cry out to prison guards for the release of their children. Maria Saldana has been camped outside these gates for more than a week. Her son Wilder was arrested after attending an anti-government demonstration. At one point, she chained herself to the fence, begging for her son's release.
My son is innocent. His only crime was holding up the flag of my country. I believe this is why they're keeping him here.
Manny, I hear the back and forth between Camilo and Stephen about who's responsible for the violence, who's hurt, who's not hurt. But the feeling as you were in Nicaragua amongst different communities, what was it like?
It's tension. Especially in places like Masaya and cities like Masaya, cities that have seen an extraordinary amount of violence over the course of the last 2 months. People must inevitably be having some sort of psychological trauma from all of this. There are daily attacks by paramilitary forces that are coming into the town and firing indiscriminately at civilians. Yes, there may be individuals who are armed, but overwhelmingly what we're seeing from anti-government demonstrators, most of them being very young, teenagers oftentimes, is that they're not armed. And if I can just say something in regards to that snippet of my report on the detainees as a quick update, the gentleman that I was reporting on, his name was Wilder Saldana. He has since been released. He was held for 8 days after he was picked up after a protest, and he was released along with another half dozen detainees that were picked up during protests. That, sadly, but still good news, was the only bit of good news that I was able to report in my time in Nicaragua, because there's still an unknown number of forced disappearances where people didn't end up in jail. They simply disappeared. There's no way to know what ended up happening to a lot of these protesters.
Malika.
Well, I want to push this forward just a little bit more because while we have so many tweets on the protest tactics, one of the things that people want to know about is negotiations and is the way forward. This is Toyota on Twitter who says the president's greatest weakness is the fact that he is no longer Nicaragua's worshipped savior. Social media has united all Nicaraguans, even former Ortegan followers. That's why this is working. There is no opposing political party. This is the people's movement. But on the other side of that is someone who thinks that Ortega is the perfect person for negotiations and will lead the country towards peace. This is Francisco. We've subtitled his response to us in Spanish. Have a listen to what he told us.
El presidente Ortega puede y va avanzando en la solución de la crisis. Desde el inicio de la misma ha demostrado total apertura, voluntad y compromiso en la búsqueda de acuerdos con los movimientos protestantes desestabilizadores. Y a nivel internacional ha dado pasos firmes que a la fecha están permitiendo el acompañamiento y colaboración de organizaciones de cara a fortalecer la democratización, la investigación de las muertes y que se haga justicia en el país. El presidente Ortega, aunque ciertos sectores no quieran reconocerlo, es un líder político profundamente comprometido con la paz en Nicaragua.
So Camilo, Francisco there says that the president is advancing the solution to the crisis. I know that you're indirectly involved in the negotiation, in the dialogue. What do you make of that comment?
I think that the president will show willingness to bring peace to Nicaragua when he orders the paramilitary groups, followed by the police, to leave the streets. He is the one that has the power to disarm these groups. And the reason why he's not doing that is because he knows that if these groups give him certain protection, because he is the head of the army and the police, and he's sending these paramilitary groups out there, and the government says they have nothing to do with them because he doesn't want to take responsibility for what is happening. But everybody knows that these groups are being coordinated by mayors, by political secretaries of the FSLN party, by ex-military people that have been recruited to be part of these groups. And the proofs are in the videos. All these groups, they move into the neighborhoods, and behind them comes the police. So, somebody has to explain to me how groups that have nothing to do with the government move around with the police to try to open up roads and take people prisoners and fire indiscriminately against innocent people, killing them. And they have nothing to do with the government. And I want to just point out something that Stephen was saying about the government and what it's done in the last years. I've been critical as a human rights activist and as a journalist of all governments in Nicaragua. There's always room for improvement. And obviously in the economic front, you could say the government, did some things that did help the poor. But you can't do that and get rid of essential rights like the right to elect your leaders, the right to express your opinion, the right to protest. Here you have in the last few years you have the media has been concentrated in a few outlets.
I've got less than 1 minute left. I just want Stephen to be able to respond to you just very briefly. Stephen, go ahead. Prospect for talks and a solution to this.
It's like through the looking glass, listening to Juan Sebastian and Camilo. And it's kind of the reverse of the truth, in my opinion. But that'll turn up. And the investigations will turn up the truth in months to come. And the political process will happen. In the next elections, I'm extremely confident that the Frente Sandinista will win the next election.
Do you think, Stephen, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, do you think President Ortega is going to announce whether or not he is in favor of early elections?
That's going to be a yes
I have
or
no
no,
idea.
Stephen.
I'm not party to the government's negotiating team. It's perfectly possible that they'll bring forward the elections.
Right.
But whenever they're held, I'm sure that the Frente Sandinista will win.
Stephen, Juan Sebastian, Camilo, and Manny. This sounds like a ripe conversation for a next episode of Nicaragua on the stream. But for now, wrapping up, Malika.
For now, the protesters' demands remain. Toyota says Ortega's immediate resignation, police forces and government guerrillas to stop repressing the people, and justice for the murdered, among other things.
That's all the time we have. Thank you for watching. Malika and I will see you online always and on the stream the next time. Take care.